Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Aaron Smith. I'm the CEO of EBA Team Zero, and I'm joined as always by Nancy Bakeman. Hi, Nancy. How are you today?
I'm great, Aaron. How are you?
Great. Welcome to the EBA Team Zero webinar podcast. Really excited today to present Ann Edminster with Design Avenues. Many of you know Ann. Ann will be presenting today on kicking gas, going all electric for the health of your family and the earth. And I think really this presentation, whether you're an existing homeowner, you're moving into a new home like Nancy is tomorrow, or you're building new homes, it's really going to lay out a game plan for everyone for how and why to go electric. And I think it's a great fit for our EBA Team Zero audience. I've talked about really this, what I would call the herd mentality, what I'm calling a healthy home, an electrified home, a resilient home, and a decarbonized home. So with that being said, Ann, I'd like to welcome you.
Great. Thank you, Aaron and Nancy, for organizing this. We've got a little background noise here with the herd of one making his way out of the house.
Is that the cat?
No.
Oh.
She may make an appearance at some point too. No, this is the 22-year-old.
Okay. That's an old cat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll proceed.
Yeah, welcome, Ann. It's always our pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I always enjoy it as well. It's a pleasure and an honor to have EBA host me. So we'll carry right on. You guys have seen my title slide, so we'll move on to the scintillating learning objectives, which all will be expected to memorize and pass a quiz on. Just kidding. We have 3 sections today. This is a short and sweet one, definitions and benefits. Then we will talk about electric upgrade options, and then how to make a transition plan. So first of all, this may be obvious to most of you, but not to overlook the obvious. What do we mean by going all electric? That means eliminating all of the natural gas or propane fired equipment in the home. And typically we're talking 4 primary uses, the ones shown on the right. So heating equipment, which can translate to heating and cooling when we go to electric, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. You may also note that I've put natural in quotation marks because I think it's worth noting that the gas industry has promoted this term of natural gas for a long time. And for many people, that carries a connotation of something positive, like natural food, natural health products, and so forth. And yet, natural gas is anything but healthy for people or the environment. So we have a process that we have to undergo of relearning what this means. So while I won't go deeply into the health consequences of natural gas today, I will touch on some of the ways we can improve health by removing natural gas from our homes.
And if folks want to dive more into that, we've got some great topics on induction cooking. We brought in RMI, our friends over there, and they talk about really the health impacts of natural gas in the home. So you can go into more detail in the EBA Academy if you're interested in that area.
Awesome. Yeah, those RMI's done a fabulous job with that. And I'm delighted to know that you can go take the deep dives on that. I will definitely wax lyrical about induction cooking at some point, but a deep dive on that is also very worthwhile.
You and me both. So again, an advertisement. EBA Team Zero, we had a professional chef come in and show you why she loves induction cooking.
Was that Rochelle?
Yes, Rochelle.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I didn't tell you this yet, but Rochelle will actually be cooking at the EBA Team Zero Summit in Denver.
Oh, good.
On September the 15th. So don't miss that.
Oh, I'm going to be there. I'm so excited to actually go somewhere.
I know, right?
And what better excuse? So that'll be great.
Great.
All right. You'll have to give Rochelle my favorite menus. Okay.
Okay, we will do.
Very good. So that's what we mean by going all electric. And the benefits include, drum roll, here we go, less indoor air pollution. So having combustion equipment in the house means we are burning stuff, right? And that produces off-gassing various substances that we really do not want to be breathing. It also includes fewer kitchen safety risks. We're alluding again to our friend, the induction range, or really any electric range, but
Right.
induction, certainly the preferred option. Improved equipment, because the thrust here, Aaron mentioned, this is applicable to both electrification of existing homes and new construction. But I've really got an emphasis on existing homes here because we have so many of them. Obviously, we've got many times the number of existing homes that we want to see electrified as compared to new homes. And I think a lot of builders are starting to see the wisdom and or policy direction that will shift them to all electric new construction. So when we're talking about an existing home, improved equipment, that happens anytime we swap out something old for something new, which is pretty exciting. I remember in my old home, I celebrated the death of each appliance because it was so exciting to get something new that had better performance, features, and aesthetics. So we got all of that to look forward to. And then, of course, the all-important reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that comes with electrification. And I love this statistic from SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, on the right, showing that an all-electric home has 40% less greenhouse gas emissions than an equivalent natural gas-powered home. So that saves more than a ton of CO2 annually.
So for those of us builders out there that have an F-250, that weighs about a ton. You're taking that equivalent of carbon out every year.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. And of course, as a gas, that represents a much larger volume than occupied by an F-250. So
right.
We're talking a lot of greenhouse gas emissions reduced. And then for those of you who are in areas where there is policy direction that is driving towards a cleaner grid and less fossil fuel use generally, what that means is we will be seeing significant gas prices increases over the coming decades. And in California, the Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission have done research showing that we can expect gas rates to double by 2050. So that means those who do not make the shift to all electric are really facing a significant economic hit. So we want to help people avoid that as much as possible by making the shift sooner than later. So one of the things that I think is important to talk about too, that whenever we're talking about electrifying, really efficiency is the natural companion to electrification and ideally would happen first. Although I know Aaron has a story for us later that's a counterexample in certain circumstances. So we'll save that for a little surprise after a little more background on this. So it's simply a reminder that to every rule, there is an exception. There are no absolutes in life. So again, efficiency as a prerequisite to electrification. And the benefits of doing that include improved comfort indoors. So most of us who live in existing homes experience some comfort challenges. And, you know, one thing I discovered through, decades, we're going to say several decades now in practice, working with clients who are looking to improve their homes in various ways, they tend to look on the comfort shortcomings of their homes as more like personality quirks rather than something that can be remedied, sort of like pets and their little behaviors that we are not successful in modifying. But in reality, we actually can modify the comfort of our homes to the better. And that's something that we have a real opportunity to do with efficiency improvements, while also reducing overall energy use. And that, as I mentioned in the last slide, because gas rates are slated to climb dramatically, that's quite important in the overall move towards electrification, because otherwise we're going to be hit with not only the unfortunate companion to electrifying without efficiency is to experience the electric rates that are higher typically than the companion gas rates. So we have some complicated pieces to this equation. And then the other thing that I want to point out is that efficiency really begets resiliency. These are also natural companions. And some examples of this are the benefits that come with efficiency and bring with them resiliency. Sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue this morning. We get stable indoor temperatures. So even during power outages, which many of us experience increasingly as the climate has its way with us. And this is not really just a comfort feature, I want to point out, because for many people who have health challenges, the elderly, the very young, or those who have other health issues, this is more than just comfort. It's actually a life safety feature. Every time there's a dramatic heat wave, particularly in parts of the world or even our own country that don't have adequate protection from the temperature extremes, there are deaths due to extreme heat. So this is a very important benefit. There's also greater protection of indoor air quality that comes from efficiency. The better job we do tightening up our building enclosures, the more we're protected from outdoor risks, for example, wildfire smoke intrusion, another increasingly prevalent aspect of life in many parts of the country, particularly in the West where I live. But we don't have a corner on that market, unfortunately. And reduced wildfire vulnerability. And I'll talk a little bit more about some specifics of these in a few minutes, right now, as a matter of fact. So I've got several examples. These are all drawn from a project that I've been working on in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, where the clients—
And this picture also means that I also am vintage because I'm from the 1970s. I like vintage better than old. So
You're just a youth, Aaron.
All right.
Yes, the vintage of this home is comparable to Aaron's vintage.
That's right.
But I don't think Aaron's siding is quite as deteriorated as this.
Well, thank you.
Your facade is holding up super.
Good. You're really clean.
Unlike this one. So you guys can see that the siding here really has experienced a lot of abuse of the effects of time, rain, ultraviolet, and just general wear and tear. So one of the great things about this house is I always used to tell my clients when I was doing remodeling design, think of demolition as opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, think of deterioration as opportunity. So they did recognize that it was beyond time to replace the siding. And what this allowed us to do is to do an excellent job of air sealing, which when I've pointed out dual benefit, what I mean is this is a fire and wildfire smoke protection benefit as well as a thermal benefit. Mm-hmm. So we've got both. We're installing new cavity insulation, which is primarily an efficiency benefit. Also, again, comfort. We're adding non-combustible continuous exterior insulation. Again, both fire benefit and comfort and efficiency benefit. And then on top of that, non-combustible siding, so fire benefit. So we've got all kinds of opportunities that come about by looking at the synergies between thinking about efficiency at the same time as we think about the resiliency benefits. Right. So that's just the walls. Then we move on to the glazing. And this home had a combination of single and dual glazed windows. The vast majority were single glazed. So these will all be replaced with not just dual glazed, but tempered windows. Now it turns out that dual glazing in itself improves resistance to fire, but also tempering improves the performance in the face of fire even more so. So we'll be able to do both when we replace these. Of course, it's important that we're not going to a vinyl window here because I think everyone understands how plastics behave in the face of extreme heat. So that would not be a good choice for a fire-prone area. And by the way, this home is very close to the wildland urban interface zone. And so these are very real considerations here.
Absolutely.
And then
what do you mean by compression closing? Are you
I was just going to tell you.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So this one, I know this is a term that we don't often hear in the building industry, but we basically have broad types of windows. We have fixed windows, which of course don't open at all. Those are fine. We have sliders, and that can include windows that slide horizontally, which is what we typically call a slider, or that slide vertically. So a single hung or a double hung window is an example of a sliding window that slides vertically.
Right.
Now, the third class of window are those that have a compression close. And what that means is they clamp close. So that would typically be an awning, a hopper, or a casement, right? Because all of those require some kind of clamping to close them. What that means is that it's a more solid closing mechanism. So they're much more inherently airtight. And what that means is, again, more protection against fire intrusion through embers blown into the cracks, and also, again, from the wildfire smoke intrusion. So for many places, I mean, we have far, far more homes that are affected by wildfire smoke than that are directly threatened by flames or embers. Right. So this has become a very big issue in terms of air quality and health. So yes, that's the story on compression closed windows.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. And one of the parameters on the NFRC label, the National Fenestration Rating Council label, has to do with the air tightness. But what I learned from a colleague of mine who was formerly at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, who was a window expert, is that number is certainly helpful, but just this rule of thumb to go with a compression close as opposed to something that slides is 90% of the battle in the choice of windows. So I find that to be very useful.
Yeah. And we did have one question coming up about
Okay.
the thermal transmission of the window of vinyl versus a metal window. And their question is particular to Arizona, where it gets even hotter.
Oh yeah.
What's your take? I mean, my intuition is that most window, if you have a great NFRC window, it's thermally broken. Doesn't matter if the exterior, right? Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And but it is important to note. So there are windows, I guess, that still exist that are not thermally broken. So in fact, I'll share an anecdote. So I moved, I was telling Nancy, I really sympathize with her upcoming move. We moved 2 years ago, and the house we moved into, we're very fortunate that there were only 2 non-electric items when we bought the house, and we had those replaced before we moved in. So it's an all electric home. It's also very well insulated and so forth. However, it does in fact have metal framed windows that are not thermally broken. And it was only built 3 years ago. And what I noticed last winter, I've also checked early this summer, but one day I happened to be by the windows and had some reason to touch the frame on a cold day. And I went, oh my goodness, it really is a radiator of cold or heat. So this is a very real concern. So I'm glad this was raised. So yes, we want metal clad, but thermally broken.
Right.
I will certainly add that caveat when I next use this slide. So thank you. All right, moving down to the third example in this particular home. We had a host of measures that we have incorporated in the design of this remodel. But this one I think is interesting because it sort of starts with the vents, or that's kind of the superficial topic of these improvements. So all these attic and foundation vents are being removed, but this doesn't just eliminate the opportunity again for ember intrusion in these homes. What we're doing is we're creating we're moving the insulation level from the ceiling up into the roof plane. And in so doing, creating a conditioned attic instead of an unconditioned attic.
Sure.
Similarly, in the crawl space, we'll be insulating the crawl space walls instead of under the floor, which is quite a bit easier to accomplish just logistically. And by getting these new conditioned spaces, it means they become much friendlier, more efficient spaces in which to install our new mini split heat pumps for heating and cooling. There'll be one unit in the crawl space for the lower floor, another unit in the attic for the upper floor, which will enable us to run ducts quite easily in those spaces.
Mhm.
And then those ducts and the equipment items themselves will be in semi-conditioned spaces.
Right.
So they will perform far more efficiently.
Yeah.
This is
And Anne, I mean, we see that at the new Indoor Air Plus, the Zero Energy Ready Home program, everybody is moving toward all ducting in the conditioned space. So as we're remodeling our old houses, that is such great advice for folks.
Yeah, and it's very synergistic in many cases like this, where dealing with the existing situation can be quite challenging until you kind of look at it through this different set of lenses and say, hey, wow, we can really make multiple improvements with multiple benefits by doing these relatively simple things, particularly when, in this case, there was no insulation below the floor, and the insulation in the attic at ceiling plane was very compressed and inadequately installed in the first place. And so
Right.
we have so many different rationales to do this work. So, okay, so now we have our connection here between being all electric and resilient, which I'll talk a little bit about. So those benefits include we get power restored faster after outages. So I've had colleagues do significant research showing that the electric power can be restored sometimes in hours or just a few days after a major outage event, whereas the restoration of gas can take weeks and even months after a major disaster event to be restored. So people can be concerned and say, oh my goodness, in an outage, I won't be able to cook if I transition from natural gas to electricity. Sure, that might be true for a couple days, but better that than for months.
Right. Right.
So also, my particular response to that is, it's not a bad idea to have a little camp stove available, right? A lot of people have a camp stove anyway. And if you just sort of think of that as your kind of emergency go-to, and who doesn't like a barbecue? So those are the easy solutions. And you did mention takeout earlier. That's not.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, I've got all these apps now. I'm an expert at takeout after the last 18 months.
You a DoorDash aficionado?
Yep.
Right. So we definitely have more options than people tend to think of. And in the panic of like, oh my God, don't take my gas stove away from me. So there are disadvantages to that too. We are also limiting on-site explosion risks. So one of the more harrowing stories about the North Bay fires in 2017 are about how entire subdivisions, once they had been completely leveled by fire, there was no fuel left on the ground, and the fires continued from all of the gas lines on that site. So those were not only endangering the emergency response teams who are working there, but they greatly delayed starting to actually address the effects of the disaster and get the remediation work done and have people start to rebuild. So significant. Okay, and now there's another aspect to this. We don't always talk about having distributed energy resources with electrified homes. However, they are often part of the conversation. So when we talk about adding those distributed energy resources, solar and battery, that actually further improves the resiliency of our homes, because not only do we see utility savings month over month with solar as compared to without, the solar homes also carry an increase in resale value that's been demonstrated year over year and around the country. This 4% is an average. We're also getting clean, carbon-free energy with solar and power when the grid goes down. So we're finding, I think 30% or more of solar sales now in the Bay Area are also including batteries. So nothing like having your power go out repeatedly over a relatively short period to show people the value of batteries. And of course, that's been really accentuated during the pandemic because people are also working at home. They've been having schooling at home. And so when everything is happening under your roof 24/7, the value of having that backup power has just gone up tremendously for people. It's become much more a question of the value delivered as opposed to the cost of adding it. It's definitely a trade-off situation. So long story short, this combination of efficiency, electrification, and resiliency, I really see as a win-win-win marriage, if you will.
Sure.
And now we'll go on to the electric upgrade options. Any comments or questions before we move into the second section?
No, we can keep rolling.
Okay, all right. So off we go, talk about what are the options. So just walking through again, the major electrification items. The first one, of course, is space heating. When people remove a propane or natural gas furnace, the two electric choices we're looking at, of course, you have electric resistance. That's not terribly favorable from an efficiency or cost perspective. So we're looking at heat pumps. And there are really two classes of heat pumps. I'm showing a mini split on the left and a standard heat pump on the right. All the mechanics are basically the same. The big differences are that the mini split is going to be more appropriate for smaller spaces and or very efficient homes. And it can be either ductless or ducted. There's a nice example in this center photo of a ductless mini split that's been very artfully incorporated into the drop soffit over the hallway. A lot of people complain, oh, they're really ugly, their appliances. Yes, they can be. On the other hand, our homes are full of appliances and we've sort of gotten used to how most of them look. So I think this is one of those things where there's just an adjustment to the look of something that we're not accustomed to being standard and is rapidly becoming standard. And certainly in other parts of the world and big chunks of South America, Europe, and probably other areas, mini splits are all but ubiquitous because they're so much easier to retrofit in existing buildings as opposed to putting in ducting. You know, in many places, it's just not viable to add that ducting. Now, a standard heat pump is always ducted, and that's going to be more suitable for larger and or less efficient homes, even recognizing that we'll do our best, ideally, to improve efficiency with existing homes. You know, we face certain limits to the amount of efficiency we can achieve. So that's kind of the general lowdown on these two options. I'm sure Aaron is going to tell you he has more in-depth coverage of heat pumps in other education opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to learn more on this topic, I think we probably have 10 different sessions at the EBA Academy that people can check out.
Yeah, there's every one of these topics you can do a deep dive on. So what we're doing here is just kind of the flyover of the big picture here to sort of lay out the options. Now, our second major user of gas is typically the heat pump water heater. And actually, in some mild climates, water heating can actually exceed the demand of energy demand of space conditioning. So particularly important in smaller homes or condominiums, apartments where there's not a really large heating or cooling load. So once again, we've got two options. Heat pump water heater shown on the left and a tankless on the right. By the way, I want to make a note that a tankless water heater has, I think, there's a large part of the population that has somehow acquired the idea that the tankless water heater is kind of the pinnacle of efficiency. And they often call them instantaneous. and they're not. So first of all, it's only instantaneous if that tankless unit is located virtually directly above, below, or next to the place you're calling for hot water,
Right.
which is certainly not always the case. But the other thing is, because of the nature of heat pump technology, any heat pump is going to be probably 3 to 5 times more efficient than the most efficient tankless unit.
Right.
So, and again, I would encourage you to do the deep dives on heat pump water heaters if you want if you're scratching your head and going, how is that physically possible? It's the magic of physics and of refrigerant technology. That's the short answer. But so the point to be made here, I think, is yes, you can get an electric tankless water heater. I would say typically the best use for a tankless is where you may have a very, very small demand, maybe in an accessory dwelling unit or in a part of a home that is very, very distant from all of the other hot water draws. So you want to look at that as, in my view, not the go-to option, but more of a, okay, we'll look at that when we really don't have a great way to incorporate a heat pump water heater option.
Good advice. Yeah.
So, and there are certain constraints, as I mentioned in the bullets here. The heat pump water heater does need more space around it than a conventional unit. It runs cold, so you want to be careful about where you put it, and the fact that the cold air it puts out will not be problematic. It's also can be a bit slower to recover. So if you exhaust all the hot water in the unit and you're going to need more than it holds, you may want to consider a larger capacity than you have needed in the past. So just some considerations about how to choose. Now on to induction cooking. And I mentioned this is a big favorite of mine. I have
too
been living with an induction range for the last 2 years, and
jealous.
Yeah. They are fabulous, right?
Yeah.
And I think is my little picture icon covering up stuff on my screen, on other people's screens, or no?
No, we can see the picture in the top right and
Okay.
the beauty shot of the kitchen.
All right, great. Good to know. So you can see the really nice feature of this smooth countertop. So the cleaning thing is one of my favorite features.
Yeah.
A damp rag cleans up an induction range really easily, provided you don't let stuff stick on it. But one thing that's also really cool is you can clean up as you're cooking.
Right.
Because
it's not hot.
Right? Only
Right.
the air directly under the pot gets hot.
Right.
And so while you're sitting there stirring something or waiting for it to boil, you can stir up your splatters and splashes. And it's really a lovely feature. And of course, maybe that's not as important as the fact that it's also safer, but it's definitely a favorite feature. So safer, it's almost impossible to start a fire on an induction range unless you're incredibly careless and or sloppy. You can have a paper towel sitting right next to your hot pot. You can drop a towel on top of the whole range. It's simply not going to catch fire. You don't have an open flame. And again, the only heat transmission is between the bottom of the pot and the range top. And this is because it uses a magnetic technology. And so it's only when that part of the range top contacts your steel or iron-based pot that you will get the conduction that excites the molecules that create the heat. So that's really amazing. So if you have anyone in your household who is forgetful, maybe has any kind of sight limitations, is prone to spacing out and walking away, any young children, any very elderly, and again, just forgetful, who among us has not left a burner on at one time or another and burned a dish, if not even the pot? So we have dear friends who actually had a pretty disastrous whole kitchen fire from being spacey and walking away. So none of us is immune from this. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a tremendous feature of this. But also for the cooks among us, there's much more precise control of the cooking. So with the press of a button, some people say, oh, but I can tell how much heat I want by looking at the flame. That's a learned behavior, just
Right.
as looking at the dials on induction range is a learned behavior. And when you spend time cooking, it's such a short learning curve that I think it's really people who are concerned about that will find they're very pleasantly surprised by how quickly they adapt to this new way of understanding the flame, right? How hot is hot. You learn fast. And again, because the ranges are super responsive, they heat up faster, they cool down faster. And so when you change the setting on a burner, you're going to see results almost immediately and go, oh, maybe a notch lower or maybe a notch higher. So you can very quickly see the ideal setting for the cooking task you're undertaking. And then finally, it's cooler. So we were just talking about the crazy hot spells in Minneapolis, where Aaron and Nancy are, in Portland and other places, Phoenix, of course, which experiences it with frightening regularity.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, so having a cooler kitchen is really a benefit because waste heat makes a lot of people not want to go anywhere near the kitchen in the summer. So this is all helpful.
It's not only the cooler aspect of it, and it's I need less ventilation, which is then less energy to exhaust all that waste heat, all that waste NOx or other things that are coming off. It's really a significant betterment from an energy efficiency perspective in addition, right?
Yeah, I think that's really true, Aaron. Although I'm just going to caution that you say less ventilation, but let's just say not none, because I know, yeah, right. The testing
that's best practice is you should always ventilate that to the exterior. But I think that Rochelle Boucher says, when I go into somebody's kitchen and I see this huge gas range with an industrial hood above it, it looks like a Hummer did to me in the old days. There's so much more elegant, better technology that's available for the kitchen.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And the irony about range hoods too is we see two extremes, right? We see range hoods that are pretty underpowered and or they're so noisy that no one will use them.
Right.
So they're either ineffective or too noisy and so useless. Or those Hummer hoods that could, I remember that great old line from a Willie Nelson movie. It's like, could suck the chrome off a trailer hitch. And you don't want that in your kitchen either, especially if you have any kind of gas appliance, which of course we'd like you not to. But that's a health risk too. So yeah, we want to strike that balance between the right amount of ventilation, but reduced things that need to be ventilated. So yes, thank you for adding that. Okay, moving on to clothes dryers. Once again, two choices, standard electric or a heat pump. And in this particular case, I'm honestly not going to advocate for one or the other because I see pros for both and cons for both. The con for the standard electric is it does use a bit more energy. However, on the pro side, they are much faster to dry a load of clothes. On the pro for the heat pump side, they're lower heat, gentler on clothes, don't require venting, and 50% less energy use. On the con side, it is a much longer drying time. So one of the alternatives that some of my colleagues propose is using a combination washer dryer unit, where if you have one device doing the whole operation from start to finish, then you're not so concerned about the drying time because you can set it to wash and dry and walk away, and you'll come back, let's say at the end of your workday, and it's all done.
Right.
So there are, really, again, three options here, but the third being the combination heat pump washer dryer.
Yeah, that's good advice. If you have space for two appliances anyway, why not do the combination washer dryer heat pump? Then you don't worry as much about that long dry time.
Right. Yeah. Although I think that the combo units actually have a smaller capacity.
They do.
So, just a volume. So again, you just want to look at your particular needs and choose. And of course, I will confess that in my house, I have a standard electric dryer, but I counterbalance that by line drying a lot of my laundry.
The
So
ultimate solar dryer.
exactly. Yeah. So that's my compromise. And I run it only during the peak solar hours also.
Sure.
So the sun is doing the work, whether it's with
Yep.
the machine or not with the machine.
That's great.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so moving on to fireplaces. So this is not in the top 4 items that need to be replaced, but it's definitely an issue for a lot of folks. And second to the range, this is the one that seems to evoke the most emotional response.
Mhm.
And that is people really, it's elemental, right? I mean, as human beings, we evolved in the presence of fire and we respond to it at a visceral level.
Right.
So I get that. And I don't, personally want to try to eliminate fire from people's lives. In fact, I remember many years ago, I ended up having quite the battle with some folks at the Living Futures Institute over their dictum of having no fireplaces.
Right.
There definitely are issues, but my solution, my preferred solution, you'll see on the right, which is if you want to experience fire, do it outdoors. Of course, not when there are not clean air days, not when there's any risk of embers and so forth. But
Right.
if you just that once in a while, really wanting that experience of flame, that's the way to do it. And it's inexpensive way to do it, much less expensive than the indoor alternatives.
The amazing part though, Anne, is that if you haven't gone and looked at electric fireplaces, they're incredible how they look. It looks just like a fire.
Yeah, it is really pretty phenomenal. They have improved, just by leaps and bounds
Yeah.
over the last few years. So yes, I mean, you can have the sort of visual experience of a fire in your home with these electronic devices. I think they actually call them fireplace or fire appliances or something like that.
Right.
And some of them even produce some heat.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily advocate that because it's not going to be your most efficient heat source. But again, if it's just kind of for that visceral experience once in a while, and or you have a gas fireplace to replace that has a real spot in your home that needs something there, it's definitely a really worthwhile option to look at.
Agreed.
So, and there's I should add to this slide, there is a link to a place that does a really good job of cataloging the options for that. So if folks are interested in that, I can find it and share it with you, Aaron, to send along to anyone who'd like to dig into this a little more. Okay, now pool and spa heating, again, certainly not an issue for every home in every neighborhood, but for those who have pools, it's certainly worth looking into. What I will say here, you'll see my comment on the bottom left, adult supervision required. I have a client I've been working with on pool heat pump heating for some time. And what we have learned along the way is that this really is an evolving field. And there is not a packaged solution that's going to work for everybody in every climate. For example, there's a huge difference between climates such as where you all are in the Midwest, where during the summer, you don't have it cool down dramatically at night. Where we are in coastal California, we do. It can be 100 in the daytime and it can go down into the 50s at night.
Right.
So there's a very big difference in how pool heating needs to be done in these two different environments. It also depends on the client needs and expectations, how hot they want the water, whether they plan to heat during the cool months or just during the summer. So there's no universal solution here. And what I really want to emphasize is that if you're serious about transitioning off gas for pools or spas, do your homework and find a qualified professional to work with you. And ideally that would entail both mechanical engineer who's knowledgeable about pool heating, there aren't that many of them, and an actual pool installer who is familiar with the heat pump technology.
Yeah, great.
So, yeah, and then solar thermal can be an option as well. Again, solar thermal may be suitable in some environments and set of operational parameters and not suitable in others. So for example, we found that given my particular client's needs or desires for pool heating, the solar thermal would not keep up with the demand, and it didn't end up making sense to do both. And so we're basically looking at a solution that's all heat pump run on photovoltaics.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then renewable energy. So all of the former was about things that use energy. Here we're talking about supplying them. Once again, two choices, not necessarily available everywhere, but the obvious one, of course, is on-site solar, typically roof mounted, but sometimes ground mounted. But sometimes you can get 100% clean energy or very close to it by a renewable energy provider via the grid. And sometimes that's a utility that may offer a premium 100% or close to 100% renewable service, or in parts of the country where there is community choice aggregation, then they will often offer a high percentage renewable or even 100% renewable option that's typically more a higher fraction of clean energy than the competing mainstream utility. So those are things to look at. Again, I know that community choice aggregation is not terribly widespread yet outside California, but you know, we have a propensity for exporting concepts. So what we have in California, you may find soon in coming to a community near you. And I would certainly encourage you to become an advocate for community choice aggregation. In California, just a little bit of background, the community choice aggregators are typically joint powers authorities operating at a county-wide scale. So with participation of each municipal government, as well as the county government officials. And so generally a representative from each city and each county will comprise the board for the community choice aggregators. Because they are public agencies, they are not driven by profit motive, which changes things a lot. And that opens the doors for a lot of innovation. So we're seeing some pretty exciting things come out of community choice aggregation.
Yeah, and we do have a report that one of our attendees is in Mass, and they do have a CCA in their town.
Awesome. Yeah, Massachusetts is right there neck and neck with California and a lot of energy progress. So my hat's off to my colleagues and comrades in Massachusetts. ACEEE usually ranks Massachusetts and California #1 and #2, or #2 and #1. So we have a friendly competition going. That's great. Okay, now home batteries, another component I did mention earlier, is an option where battery is a battery is a battery. They do come in smaller sizes though. So something to mention is for those who don't quite have the pocketbook yet for the full-size home batteries, such as the Tesla model shown here. There are other brands as well. Yeah, several that are now competing in the market. There are, let's say, $1,000 units that can power up, for example, 1 or 2 critical uses in a home during an outage. So worth looking at different scale options if you're not quite ready for this one. Benefits, of course, are power when the grid goes down, which is a huge resiliency issue, but also this opportunity for what's called solar self-consumption. So when you don't need to keep a good reserve in the battery for a planned or feared for power outage, what we can do is store the energy during the daytime when we have high solar production, and then use it during the higher demand and higher cost periods. So for example, here in California, we have our highest rates now from 4 to 9 p.m. because we've got so much solar on the grid that when the solar goes down, we have to start powering up our more expensive and more polluting resources. And so an alternative to that is to use your battery to get you through that high rate period,
Right.
and then start charging it up again during the day.
Yeah.
So it won't quite pay for itself yet under most circumstances, but that opportunity can certainly shave off some of the cost of the battery itself.
Yeah. And you are eligible for the rebate as well on the battery in addition to the solar. So I think currently we have a 26% rebate on the battery system.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So
mentioning that. So we
with that economics, it becomes pretty attractive,
yeah, it definitely helps.
especially with you in California, where you have a 60 cent a kilowatt hour peak rate at times, right?
Depending on what tier you're in, yeah.
Depending on what tier you're in, it could get, boy, I would have a battery if I was in California.
Yeah, it's on my shopping list.
Absolutely. And we just want to call out lots of great battery manufacturers, Tesla, Sonnen,
LG.
Yeah, LG, Panasonic. There's quite a few options now. And do you feel like that batteries have gotten closer to the point of, instead of a whole house generator with gas or propane, that
Oh,
we could look at,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I will go to the mat on that one. I
I
don't
agree.
think anybody should be buying a generator if they can spend comparable amount on a battery.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
especially because with a generator, you have an ongoing fuel cost and you're basically inviting a fire hazard onto your site.
Yeah. And a health hazard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yep, for sure. Any other questions or comments before we go on to the transition plan?
Well, one question we had is, you've obviously been very inspirational for one of our guests. They said, I want to build an all electric home. Which rating system should I use? And my early advice was to start with the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program and then work up from there. But Anne, we'd love to hear your advice to folks.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Aaron. I will also confess, as someone who's been intimately involved in the creation of Lead for Homes, as well as very involved in a number of other rating systems too, I don't think you necessarily need a rating system.
That's true, right?
Right? If you know what you're doing, or if the practitioners you're working with are well versed in these practices.
Yeah.
I think the primary value of rating systems is twofold. One is to provide scaffolding if members of your team are not really immersed in these advanced building practices already. And also, you know, most of the rating systems were really developed as a way of allowing designers and builders to differentiate their work from the more garden variety competitors.
Right.
And so if you're not selling something, then that benefit goes away. So, you know, particularly for those of us who are in existing homes, you don't need a rating system.
Right.
If you're talking about building a new home and you're not going to sell it, again, it's really more about the qualifications of your team. And I would put far more stock into picking your team for their expertise in the field than I would in the rating system per se.
And just a couple commercials from my side. Obviously, the EBA Academy does a high performance building professional designation, a zero energy professional designation. Those are great places to go and learn and have your team learn about electrification, decarbonization. And we usually walk people through at EBA. So you meet them at your need at where they're at. Some people want to start at Energy Star, move to Indoor Air Plus, move to DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program, and then you can graduate. If you're building a newer home, you want Lead for Homes or Living Building Challenge or Passive House. They're all great programs with great attributes. But one thing I did want to announce, Anne, is the White House announced last month too that EPA, our friends at EPA, are planning to develop an electrification certification for new homes, which is really exciting news.
That is, yeah. And that's where I think there's really, again, a need, because the workforce nationwide, I think we have to acknowledge, is just not well versed in a lot of these practices.
Mhm.
And so having these programs, particularly targeting new construction, where we have, let's say, the most aggregation of companies making these decisions on multiple new homes, that's really, really important.
Right.
So it's, in many ways, we have a much bigger challenge dealing with the electrification improvement of existing homes, because there are many, many, many hundreds of thousands and millions more of them, and a much more fragmented workforce. That's a whole different challenge.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we really rely on mobilizing and educating homeowners
Yes, absolutely.
to be seeking those professionals with the qualifications you're talking about.
Right.
So
And
really,
I do want to add a plug for the Zero Energy Building Professional Directory at EBA Team Zero, where you can submit your company if you have expertise there. But we want to create a pathway for existing homeowners where you can find an architect, a builder, a mechanical engineer, an HVAC contractor that's familiar with these techniques and plug into them and make that decision at the point of inflection. When your air conditioner goes down, you've got a great opportunity, right, Ann?
absolutely. Yeah. And as I said, celebrate the death of any appliance. I'm a big fan of avoiding waste of all kinds, but I think it's really, I'll go back to the slide where I showed, oh no, it's actually coming up. So we'll get to that point. And I realize I have to sort of zoom through these last.
Oh, Ann, if people don't mind, we love having you. You can go longer.
Okay.
Don't zoom. Don't zoom. We've done enough zooming the past 18 months.
Oh, well, good point. Well, we're already zooming, aren't we? On the
We
other
are
hand,
zooming.
if people have to mosey on to their next commitment,
Yeah, and
I'll try
just
to.
for people that need to go at the top of the hour, this will be recorded and uploaded at the EBA Academy, and it will be a podcast on Spotify and some different places. So you can always check out the end later on.
Great, great. But I'll try to go fast without making you drink from a fire hose here.
Okay.
All right. Oh, now I got my clicker. Okay, here we go. So the transition plan is, first of all, to think ahead, not just maybe what you're planning to do in the immediate future, but anything electrical that you may have in your future, plan for it now. Because one of the things I learned through decades of working on remodel projects with people is, all too frequently, something that had been done recently ended up being an obstacle to something that was done later, either through lack of planning or from just sort of unfortunate sequencing. So the first thing to do is sort of understand the full scope of your electric wish list. Then I recommend reducing your demand by dealing with the easy stuff first. For example, and lighting appliances are the easiest things to make more efficient. And I'm giving you some resources for selecting best in class. And what I want to point out is, on the upper right in this green box, used to be that Energy Star was kind of the default for best in class. Well, it's not anymore. And EPA has even acknowledged this by introducing this new label, Energy Star Most Efficient. So be sure to look at those products. And I've given you 3 links that are all tremendously helpful. My personal favorite is the third one in the green box, choose.nrv.com. There's a screenshot from that site shown below. So it'll give you a rating, a score from 0 to 100, 100 being the highest. And you get all kinds of other information about these products too. And also an incredibly useful feature For refrigerators, for example, you can filter by size. So in an existing home, you may have a size of a cavity that your refrigerator needs to fit into, and a lot of them may not fit. So you can narrow it down to things that fit well. And I usually recommend filtering for things that have a rating of 90 or higher. If you don't find what you want, you can always drop that to 85, 80 and so. But that's a really a wonderfully powerful search engine that NRV has developed. And then I've got some other resources for you to learn a little bit more about lighting. The one thing I will say about LEDs is they have come light years, pun intended, in the last decade. So if you used to think LEDs were not what you wanted because they didn't provide the right quality of light or weren't bright enough or whatever problem, virtually all of those problems have been overcome. And there's a terrific selection of LEDs now available at reasonable cost. So don't hesitate.
And really every light look that you want, you know, if you like that old look of incandescence, it really, when you see the new LEDs that are kind of color corrected to that, it looks like the old incandescence, which is great. Yeah,
it's really, huge variety available. So enclosure efficiency can be quite a bit more challenging to address. I definitely would recommend looking at attics, crawl spaces, and other obvious gaps. Walls can be more challenging, but in some cases are very worthwhile. So keeping in mind, I love this sort of the good and the bad / ugly examples here. And you might think, oh, that's absurd. Nobody installs insulation like that picture on the right. The reality is that's far more common than the well-installed insulation on the left. So you want a good assessment of the condition of your insulation and what opportunities that might present.
And if you're a homeowner out there listening, I mean, one thing that the bat insulation industry has done is really come out with a level 1 or grade 1 installation, just to ensure that your installer is certified, that they can provide a level 1 installation that's going to look like the one on the left, and insist on that. And if you need somebody to come check that, there are great energy raters that can do blower door. They can check the quality of installation. Might be $600 well spent on the remodel.
Absolutely. Yeah. But ideally, again, you want to pick an insulation installer who understands what a good quality installation is and isn't intent on giving you the lowest bid, but rather on the best job.
Absolutely.
So, and, to be fair, there is huge price competition in that market. And so it's, I think, kind of like going to your medical provider, and sometimes all they'll tell you is what they think insurance will cover, and that might not be all you need. And it's sort of similar in this market. Say, is this your best insulation job you're quoting me?
Right.
So
it's like sheetrock, right? You can have a level 3 or a level 4 or a level 5. In insulation, it's the opposite. I want a level 1 install. What are you quoting me today?
Yeah, very good point. And speaking of the way we do numbers, that's actually a great segue to my window slide, because what you'll see in the red box on the right, again, this the whole black portion is the NFRC, National Fenestration Rating Council label. And the two arguably most important numbers here are the U factor and the solar heat gain coefficient. In both cases, the lower the number, the better the rating, or the better the performance. So U factor,
because it's inverse of R, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's something that who knows why. I often say to people new to the building industry, welcome to the logic-free zone. So that's why we have high numbers are good for thermal insulation of walls, and low numbers are good for thermal performance of windows in those walls.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. But like I said, logic-free zone. Anyway, it's also valuable to look at the opportunity to add shading devices, particularly if you have cooling loads that are significant. Right. And You'll note that I've said in green, choose appropriate values for your climate. These are examples. These are not universal prescriptions. And I've given you 2 resources below that in the gray box. The Energy Star window specs, which are sort of what I would call the good value, or sort of the minimum good value. And then the Lead for Home specs, which provide 2 levels, a better and a best, that are based on climate specifics. So I would encourage you to look at those if you're in the market for replacement windows. Okay, next step, when you've done what you can to improve the enclosure and your overall efficiency, is think about whether you're going to need electric service upgrade. So we talked about the list of electric items. So I've enumerated those again here. And each one of those is potentially going to add load to your electrical panel and may necessitate a panel and a service replacement, which is not a small ticket item. So, and there are also some issues. So for example, the older home I lived in, I was looking at electrification before we moved, and I realized that one of the challenges was that our range didn't have adequate electric service to it to replace with induction, would have required running new wiring and getting a new outlet there. And it was very, very challenging to figure out how that was going to happen based on the location of the panel and the location of the range. So it's not just the panel replacement, it's the implications of doing that you want to just map out really carefully and or have your professionals look at with you.
Yeah, great advice. And we do have some sessions on smart panels. I think we had a session on the Wiser panel from our friends at Schneider. You can monitor energy use across your house through some of the new smart panels. So if you're looking to upgrade, there's really some neat features, which I think you're going to tell us about here, because those phantom loads can be the insidious part once you get a really efficient house, right?
They can be, yeah. Although it's interesting, a lot of the electronic device manufacturers are improving. So given the rate at which we tend to replace our electronics, that's, I'd say, becoming a less prevalent issue. And I'm not going into that too much, but what I'm showing here instead is if there's a situation where it becomes really problematic or cost prohibitive to look at a panel replacement, and yet you do want to electrify, there's some ways to go. A colleague of mine has coined this term of going on an AMP diet. And that's a couple of the strategies. Here are these plug sharing devices that I'm showing 2 of, the Dryer Buddy and NeoCharge. And then also in some cases, there is lower amperage equipment available. And here I'm showing one of these combined condensing washer dryers, as well as a lower amperage heat pump water heater. And I expect we're going to be seeing more and more of these options over time as electrification becomes, sort of starts to crescendo across the US landscape. We're going to see more solutions to this problem.
Yeah.
So once you have figured out your ability to address the increased electrical demands in your system, then is the time to move into the actual upgrades. I've already talked about these equipment items, the heat pump items. I'm just adding a few tips on each of these pages. I actually will skip the tips because I think Aaron will send out the slides and you'll have that information. And by the way, I would also encourage those of you, I know probably a lot of folks in the audience are professionals, maybe most of you, and these slides I think could be quite helpful to share with some of your clients or homeowners who may be considering some of this type of work. So feel free to share these PDFs around.
That's great advice. Thank you for that as well, Anne.
Sure, yes. And then finally, the powering up after you've done all the equipment replacements and seeing how you're going to provide the energy, clean energy to support all this. I've shown the 26% federal tax credit. And there are also some other information resources here, 2 from Energy Sage, and then 1 from Green Change, which is a local nonprofit in my area, and where I help them put together a home battery guide that includes not just the full home batteries that we talked about earlier, but also some of the very small, like device size batteries and these intermediate, say, $1,000 type batteries to look at. So there's a whole range of information there.
Right.
And that, I think we've covered all the important stuff here. And here's the other thing I was starting to mention is looking at replacing equipment before failure. So we had a situation recently, my stepson and his wife had a problem with a refrigerator and they were looking at repairs. And I said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How old is that refrigerator? Because
Vintage.
yeah, right, vintage. Yeah, you can spend as much making a repair almost as buying a new appliance, and you could be repairing something that has significantly lesser performance in terms of energy efficiency, not to mention other features, than buying something new. And certainly refrigerators are standouts in terms of older ones being dramatically less efficient than new ones. But then all of these electrification items we've talked about as well, really important to look at their life expectancy and where your equipment is on that timeline so that you can avoid those disastrous experiences of your water heater or your furnace going out right when you're expecting half the family for a holiday meal, or even better, house guests for an extended visit. So definitely plan on replacing early. The other benefit of doing this is that because electrification and particularly heat pump equipment is not yet really well diffused throughout the installation community, you want to be able to get what you want, and that may require advance notice. Whereas if you have one of these equipment items go out on you and you need it like tomorrow, you may have to settle for something that's not what you want. And I will say that I've heard several sad stories, even of colleagues who are in this business who, like me, are ardent advocates of electrification, who have said, head hanging low, I had to get another natural gas furnace. So don't let that happen to you. And I've given a little lookup tool up here in the green bubble on the right that'll help you find at least the age of your water heater, air conditioner, furnace. I don't know of a comparable tool for ranges and dryers. However, what I have learned through this process is that most manufacturers code the manufacturing date of their appliances into their serial numbers. So with a little sleuthing, you should probably be able to find the answer for the ranges and dryers as well. And the last thought here is to think for yourself and also encourage your clients to think in terms of these synergies, because I found myself also explaining this first item recently to family member two, the cost of mobilization of trades. Generally, homeowners don't think about this. They don't think about the fact that just getting an electrician or a plumber or a sheet metal trade person.
Yeah, especially right now, right, Ann?
Oh my gosh, yes. Costs are so extraordinarily high right now. And so just mobilizing the trade to get on site has a significant price tag to it. So while you have them, while you can get on their calendar, you want to have them do as much as possible. So that's a big factor. And then some of these other just scenarios to think about. An electric vehicle and the fuel savings that go with that could help offset or counterbalance the cost of some electrification upgrades. And if you're getting an EV, maybe that allows you to get an extra size photovoltaic panel. Aaron, that's your cue. Tell us your story about this.
Okay, well, I know Ann talked about the way to deploy this, but one thing that I realized after putting my, doing some efficiency upgrades, I have a 10.54 kilowatt electric solar array on my house. And one of the things you realize is, depending on what state you're in, they allow 120% of your historic or your last 12 months energy bill. So depending how big of a solar array you want and what your plan is, and I love how you put together the plan. Sorry, we got requests for Anna. I've been told I have a face for radio, so but I'm happy to be on. So one of the ways to think about it is if you put down that, hey, my wife and I both want an EV. We ordered the new Ford F-150 Lightning. We're going to a heat pump. We're going to an induction cooktop. Is to possibly put those things in and track your energy use for 12 months, because then you can qualify for 120% of more of an electric demand versus the previous historical demand without electric appliances. So that's what Ann and I talked about before we came on today.
Yeah, and I love that strategic thinking because I think, and again, Aaron, you said this, we're all going to be looking at higher electric uses, right? I mean, whether electrification is a big topic yet in your locale or not, mark my words, in 6 months or a year or even less, you will find that it is all over the airwaves.
Yeah.
And this is a necessary shift that we are seeing due to the need to combat climate change. And so that means we probably all are going to want a larger PV array than maybe we initially envisioned. Right. So I'm not necessarily anti the mantra of efficiency first, but as Aaron pointed out, there is a strategic approach that says, maybe not first. Maybe look at that. And, the other thing I will point out too, and I've actually been saying for years, is that efficiency first makes absolute sense in the context of new design and construction. In the context of existing homes, sometimes adding solar first makes way more sense because it's easy and you can have an immediate benefit from it. I also refer to it as the gateway drug to efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. When people add solar, they get excited.
You do. And
your energy.
And you've seen some of those studies on, the solarized studies and the adoption rates that people see. And I can tell you in my neighborhood, I put solar in and now 6 of my neighbors have put solar in because it is very exciting. It is, you can actually see it. It's out there. So it can drive a lot of excitement. And sometimes there's that snowball effect.
Yeah.
You want to have some excitement. You want to have a great win and you're heading all electric. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing is like, what's the right point of entry for any given individual or household? Right. Any point of entry is the right point of entry. But I think it helps to take this systemic look of things and understand that we do ideally want to reduce loads and electrify, but the right sequence is going to differ from situation to situation.
Yeah. And so I've got a question that I think was really good. And I know that between the two of us, we should be able to answer it.
Oh, challenging.
Yeah. How can replacing your appliances or early be justified in view of embodied energy? It's a great question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, as I mentioned, I'm an advocate of replacing early, not crazy early.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you have a refrigerator that's 2 years old, or, a furnace that's 2 years old, that's probably not the first thing I would choose to swap out because of that concern. However, just a little anecdotally, I'll tell you a little story. I'm seriously considering, my next vehicle will be an electric vehicle. No question about that. Of course, I've driven virtually not at all in the last year, like so many of us, to the grocery store and back a few dozen times. So it's not on the immediate horizon, but I had that concern about vehicles. And so I actually did a thumbnail calculation to say, well, what are the sort of net carbon implications for purchasing a new vehicle versus and its operational embodied plus operational carbon versus continuing to operate my existing vehicle, which, with no additional embodied carbon investment, but just the fuel emissions, right? And what I learned from that exercise was that after 3 years, actually slightly less than 3 years, I would be carbon positive with a new EV as compared to continuing to drive my internal combustion engine vehicle. And, my guess is just in very rough orders of magnitude, it's probably a pretty similar equation for a lot of existing appliances, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
and
a great
especially,
point.
I mean, they're mostly hunks of steel that can be recycled, and they will be recycled in most parts of the country because there's an economic incentive to do that.
Right.
So
I think it's a great point. And, depending on your grid or your ability to produce on-site solar, your operational carbon immediately goes to zero.
yeah. Again, as you say, depending on your grid. Here in California, we are about ready to hit, I think, 40% clean electricity on the grid, which is probably better than most parts of the country. But then again, if you have solar, if you have community choice aggregation, or have some sort of premium utility service, you can also make those choices to have a cleaner electricity grid supply. So,
well, Anne, I want to thank you. I'd love to encourage all of you to join us at the EBA Team Zero Summit in Denver, September 14th through 16th. We would love to get a chance to meet all of you. There'll be lots of incredible sessions just like today's, but Anne, thank you again.
my pleasure, Aaron. Thank you. And thanks for putting up with a longer than anticipated presentation.
Oh, it was great learning. All right, thanks everyone. Anne, can you stay on for a second?
Yes, will do.
Great. Let's see, okay.